History is not everyone's strongest subject, but it is the only subject that does not change. Words are added to the lexicon every day. The rules of math change based on new theorems. Science discovers its own errors on a daily basis. But history? You cannot change what has already happened. You can at best misrepresent what happened, or simply not talk about what happened. But you can never change what happened. You should consider being honest about it for a few reasons. One, because trying to remember your lies takes a lot more effort than simply remembering the truth. And two, because truth always comes to light, as long as there are eager souls willing to pore over the past and see how it compares to the present. Our word of the day is slavery.
Glenn Youngkin will be sworn in as the governor of Virginia, writing a campaign that highlighted critical race theory and teaching adequate history in our schools. It is a tactic that could prove valuable for conservatives this November. Their main fear is that learning adequate history will make us hate white people. But the problem is the history we have always been taught forces us to look on the past with favorable opinions instead of the guilt and shame that would force us to change. That is by design, because the same people who want to be able to fly the flag of the Confederacy either don't know what the Confederacy stood for by their own words, or they speak with such calculation to make sure that they do not reveal how ignorant of the Confederacy they are not. Not far from the Virginia State House, you will find the Confederate White House. Richmond, Virginia, just a few hours south from Washington, D.C. Jefferson Davis met with soldiers while the legislature of the Confederacy met inside the Virginia State Legislature just a few blocks away. I'm going to go out on a limb and say you have likely never read the Constitution of the United States, and there's a strong possibility you did not know the Constitution of the Confederacy existed. It is the legacy of the Confederacy that is misrepresented by conservatives, white and black, immigrant and native, that guides the misinformation campaign highlighted by claiming critical race theory rewrites history. We can make the argument that the war between the states was about states' rights and individual freedom, that it was about the economy, and that it had nothing to do with slavery or how Negroes should be treated. A reading from the Constitution of the Confederacy surely indicates there was a major difference between what the United States wanted in its government and what the Confederate States of America wanted in its government. Now, at first glance, the Constitution of the Confederacy and the Constitution of the Union look similar. Both documents place Congress as the first established branch of government. Both documents give Congress the power to levy taxes and borrow money, establish post offices, declare war. Both establish enumeration every 10 years, which we know as the census. In many instances, you cannot tell the two documents apart. I'll explain why I highlight these similarities later, but first, one of the key areas where they differ, a reading from the Constitution of the Confederate States of America, preamble. We, the people of the Confederate States, each state acting in its sovereign and independent character in order to form a permanent federal government, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, invoke the favor and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the Confederate States of America. End quote. Unlike the Constitution of the United States, which says to form a more perfect union, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, the Constitution of the Confederate States establishes states' rights and individual rights for those states. Now, before you celebrate this as a victory, let's find the section of the document that eerily resembles our Bill of Rights. In the Constitution of the United States, the Bill of Rights comes at the end, but in the Constitution of the Confederacy, the Bill of Rights is tucked into the first article under the establishment of the legislative branch. The Second Amendment in the U.S. Constitution is the 13th clause in Section 9 of the CS Constitution, the right to bear arms. The Fifth Amendment in the U.S. Constitution is the 16th clause in Section 9 of the CS Constitution. The First Amendment in the U.S. Constitution is the 12th clause in Section 9 of the CS Constitution. There are a few clauses not found in our Bill of Rights, such as some on taxes. Oh yes, and then there is the first clause in Article 1, Section 9 of the Constitution of the Confederate States. The importation of Negroes of the African race from any foreign country other than the slaveholding states or territories of the United States of America is hereby forbidden, and Congress is required to pass such laws as shall effectually prevent the same. The second clause, Congress shall also have power to prohibit the introduction of slaves from any states not a member of or territory not belonging to this Confederacy. The third clause, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended unless when in cases of rebellion or invasion the public safety may require it. The fourth clause, no bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law denying or impairing the right of property in Negro slaves shall be passed. I didn't write it. No one alive today wrote those words, but those words are what is written in, quote, adopted unanimously by the Congress of the Confederate States of South Carolina, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Texas, sitting in convention at the Capitol, the city of Montgomery, Alabama, on the 11th day of March in the year 1861. That is what the Confederate States of America established. A country that has not existed since April 1865. The Union won the war, but the Confederacy won the peacetime. It is important to recognize the only major differences in the two constitutions centered around slavery. I reiterate, whatever your argument might be that the Civil War was not fought to end or challenge slavery, the Constitution of the Confederate States established slavery and ownership as a right, established freedom for slaves as not a possibility, and established slaves as those from Africa or of African descent. So, as much as many people want to talk about the indentured services of the people from Europe, the Constitution of the Confederacy plainly stated who is to be considered slaves. I highlight this for a reason, especially considering the fact that Lincoln did not want the former Confederate States to be treated like traitors, but instead as citizens, with the exception of allowing them to vote or continue enslaving or terrorizing Negroes from Africa. Keep in mind that only 12 years past the end of the Civil War, the United States of America surrendered to the former Confederacy, ending Reconstruction and allowing the former Confederate States to implement Jim Crow. It should not be lost on anyone that the first person in the reunited Congress to ask that the former Confederacy be treated with leniency is also the first black senator elected to Congress. What state was he elected from? Mississippi. This was during a time when the state legislature determined their senators, a practice that was overturned by the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, April 8, 1913. We can make the argument that the only reason the white men of the Mississippi State Senate elected a black man was to confuse the lawmakers in the nation's capital on whether or not there was racism attached to the idea. It may not have been racism, it was definitely tokenism. Treating the traitors of the South with leniency increased racism in this country. But the legacy of the enslavement of the African race is not only erased by the men, but at the efforts of the women who proudly called themselves the daughters of the Confederacy.
Next time, Off the Top.